Okay, now we're good. Before I get started, to just give you a little gist about what HBCUs are and the history behind HBCUs. Um, HBCUs, or historically Black colleges and universities, were established in the US in the early 19th century to provide undergraduate and graduate level education opportunities to people of African descent. Black students were unwelcome at existing public universities or private institutions of higher education, even after the passing of specific legislation resulting in the lack of higher education communities. The majority of HBCUs originated from 1865 to 1900, with the first one being Cheyney University, but most of the HBCUs came after the Emancipation Proclamation that happened in 1867. And so today we have a great range of HBCU graduates here. I personally went to Southern University for my undergraduate degree, as well as Tuskegee University for my PhD. And so what I wanted to do is I'll go through and introduce everyone and let them say hi, and then we're gonna hop right into the conversation. So first, I want to introduce Dr. Janae Sweeney. She is a graduate of South Carolina State University. She received her master's in molecular biology from Georgia State and her PhD from Clark Atlanta University in biological sciences. Welcome, Dr. Sweeney. Next, I have Dr. Mckay Cullen. He received both his bachelor's at Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia, and received his PhD at Morehouse School of Medicine in biomedical sciences. So welcome, Dr. Mullen. Dr. Jackie Trish, she is a graduate of Tuskegee University, and she actually was on my dissertation committee. So welcome, Dr. Trish. She completed her PhD at Tuskegee in integrated biosciences, went on to do a postdoc at the University of Michigan, and now she's an associate professor of biology at Troy University in Alabama. And lastly, we have Dr. Joanne Powell. She received her PhD from Harry Medical College here in Nashville, Tennessee, where I'm based. And then she went on to do her postdoctoral work at Emory University School of Medicine. And now she is she holds joint appointments as a professor of biological sciences, as well as the director of professions advising unit. So welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm glad everyone's here to kind of have the conversation. I kind of wanted to jump right into it. Number one, what brought you into science? What got you into the field that you're in? I think that's something that we all like to think about, especially when we're talking to younger generations, because they have access to all types of social media, YouTube, Snapchat, Twitter. And so we like to put the emphasis on exposing them to how people got interested in the field that they're in. So I can start with Dr. Mullen. If you want to go ahead and tell us how you got started, what interested you in getting into the field that you're in.
Oh, yeah, sure. So my mother's actually a breast cancer survivor. I studied cardio-oncology here at Stanford. And when she was diagnosed with breast cancer, it bothered me not knowing anything about the treatment that was going on. So I wanted to know how I could help. So I based my PhD dissertation research on the drug that she was being treated with that actually saved her life, paclitaxel. And I wanted to learn more about it and see if we could figure out better approaches, a more efficacious drug. And I actually based my dissertation research on finding a better drug. And here at Stanford, I'm actually looking at the adverse effects of this drug on the cardiovascular system. So it started with my mom, and I'm sure many people have a similar story.
Great, thank you. I'll go from left to right from my screen. Dr. Powell.
Well, thank you guys for inviting me. I think I'm probably the old head on the call now. So I have to think back a little further, but I think I've always had just a natural interest in discovering things, even when I was very small. And I was fortunate enough to grow up in a very, very small town. I was born and raised in Tuskegee. And the benefit of that is that we had the wonderful Tuskegee University just right there in the center of town. And so my parents really nurtured my curiosity by just kind of dragging me in to the university for anything that was open to the public, even though they probably really had no interest in it and didn't understand it. I'm a first generation college student, but they always, told me how important it was, how education was always going to be the passport to the future. And I really didn't have a choice. So I figured I might as well do something that I enjoy, which was science. And then while still in high school, we had a year where it just seemed, unfortunately, several of my classmates' parents all died from cancer in the same year. And I thought, well, maybe I can use my interest to do something good. And that was the beginning of my interest as a cancer researcher. And it just kind of continued to develop and snowball from there.
Thank you. Dr. Sweeney.
Hello, thank you for the invite. So my journey to science is kind of sorted. So I was actually more interested in medicine before I got my PhD in biology. I was always interested in biology and science and the medicine standpoint of it. But then at a certain point, I kind of became more interested in cancer biology and understanding what was going on with cancer, how I could work and, within the field to kind of try to combat that, because I had family members who were diagnosed with cancer. So my whole life just became all about cancer research. So once I kind of let the medicine side subside, I became really interested in understanding all the mechanisms and things of that sort in cancer research and trying to really, I guess, become a part of a field that I never thought that I would ever be a part of.
Great, and I'm glad to have you on board. Janae's actually been helping us with the Black in Cancer effort, so really appreciate it. And lastly, Dr. Trish.
So I started off in chemistry and I was pretty good at it, but it was not fun at all. Unfortunately, I'm being very transparent. It was not fun at all. So I decided to switch gears a little bit and give a different direction of research a try. And I ended up going into cancer research. And I absolutely loved it. I thrived in it. It kept me up at night wanting to ask more questions. And so for me, that was a clear indication that that's the direction I need to go in. And I think coupled with that, with two of my grandfathers dying from cancer, it really pushed me even further to want to dive into this area.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have that personal connection with getting the degree. Everyone knows getting a PhD is not easy. So having that personal connection kind of pushes us through. And it kind of leads us into our next question. And Dr. Trish, actually, we'll start with you this time. What factors contributed you to going to an HBCU? I'm pretty sure everyone had applied to tons of schools, but what thing was the deciding factor for you to attend an HBCU?
So for grad or undergrad?
Let's do undergrad, and then we can. Yeah. Okay.
So I'll be honest. From born and raised New England, first gen college student. I knew nothing about HBCUs. I actually got into Purdue. I started there and didn't get enough scholarship. So my mom said, "Hey, we can't afford to pay Purdue money. You got to figure something out." And I used to teach ballet at a local dance studio, and two of the owners were alum from HBCU. And I ended up getting a full ride, never been to the South at all. And that's ultimately how I got in. I didn't know anything about HBCUs, I have to be very honest, but I'm so glad that I did because I flourished there.
Yeah, and just kind of piggybacking off of that, and you then went on to do your PhD at Tuskegee University.
I did.
Yeah, so what made you want to continue your graduate studies at an HBCU?
One of my mentors from undergrad did her undergrad at Tuskegee, and I had done several interns at UAB, and they had an opportunity for me to do a couple program where I did my research at UAB, took my classes at Tuskegee, and did my research there as well. So it was like a dual program, and just me honestly relying on her trust, because I had built that trust with her. I really respected her word as a mentor. She never steered me wrong. So, giving her suggestion along with me being a mother, I was married with a child at that time. So me moving too far was kind of difficult for me. And I'm so glad that I did.
Izzy, thank you for that. Dr. Powell, I would kind of want to hit you next, because I know you went to Meharry, which is a really great school. And I wanted to go to Meharry but then I went to Tuskegee. So can you tell me what got you to doing your graduate studies at a HBCU?
Okay, so when I am the youngest of six. And like I said, my parents were really they weren't taking any excuses about us going to college, even though we were first generation. So all of my older siblings had attended HBCUs for undergraduate, and they attended PWIs for their graduate education. And so when I was finishing, of course, all of the common ones came up about you must apply to PWI A, B, C, and D. I was really interested in Meharry because some great people that I'd met who had become mentors of mine had already, they attended Meharry and were graduates of Meharry as well. And so I applied everywhere and got offers from a lot of places. But what sealed the deal for me with Meharry was one thing that they didn't do or didn't have to do that the PWIs did during my visit, which was every PWI that I went or got an interview at took me to their Forum of Diversity office, right? And there were always these opportunities, these funds are available to you and all of those things, which is great, right? They had a diversity office. They were trying to provide opportunities to me, but it didn't feel good for me and my personality. Like some people are going to be the trailblazers and they're going to be the first to do everything. And I just felt like I wanted to embrace what was the mission of Meharry. So that's what won me over. When I went to Meharry, and I met with Sakina Elton there. She was working on a project where they were working with the residents of Dixon, Tennessee, who felt like their water had been poisoned and was causing these increases in cancer incidents. And the college had really taken on this entire city to provide the scientific background that they needed for their lawsuits. And that was work that students got to work on. And I thought, well, this is what I want to spend my life doing, right? Like, I don't want to just have an effect through the work that I do in the laboratory, but I want to see it reflected in the community. And so it was really her, that project, and Meharry's mission that won me over.
I love to hear that note of community and that being a deciding factor for you. So that's really awesome. Thank you for sharing. Let's go with Dr. Sweeney.
So I attended elementary, middle school, and high school up north. So up north, I was one of maybe two students in each one of my classes, because I had honors classes, I had AP classes, and I am still friends with those of us who were one of two in the class. And so sometime in my schooling, we moved to St. Croix, which is where my mom is from. So it was the first time ever that I was around everyone who looked like me. I wasn't the one or two out of some students in an AP government class or a history class. And so when it came down to college, it was a given, HBCU. I want to be back in that environment. I enjoyed that environment. I want to experiment and, be with these people who are just like me, have friends who are just like me, and not, although it's nice to have a diverse group of friends, but I just wanted to be with people who were like me. And so that's why I applied to and attended South Carolina State University. And then I attended Clark Atlanta University for my PhD, because in my application process for undergrad, of course, I did it, I'm a high school student. I was kind of lazy, did it when I wanted to, and I missed the deadline for Clark Atlanta. So it was just a given PhD. This is one of the schools that I'm going to apply to. This is where I wanted to go for undergrad. So that's why I decided HBCU.
Thank you, Dr. Sweeney. And lastly, Dr. Mullen, you actually started at Morehouse and you stayed at Morehouse to complete your PhD. So can you give us a little background of what were your deciding factors?
Yeah, so when I was applying to undergrad, I actually got into like 4 or 5 schools, but I specifically remember my parents popping bottles of champagne when I got into Morehouse. They didn't do that for the other schools. They did it for Morehouse though, so I was kind of nudged there, but I was really glad they did that, because Morehouse was really a great experience, and it prepared me for the world by creating this tight-knit community that felt more like family. So when I got accepted to Morehouse School of Medicine for my master's and my PhD, naturally I was expecting the same thing, and it did not disappoint. Tiara and other people who have gone to Morehouse with can tell you, we became a family. I look at anyone at Morehouse School of Medicine and Morehouse College like my brothers and my sisters. And that's something that I might not have gotten from a PWI, but I definitely got from HBCU, and no one can take that away. So it's a great overall experience, and I'm grateful that I got 3 degrees from an amazing school.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. So for the next question, I'm just going to pick maybe like 2 or 3 people. But what are some things that you believe that you got from HBCU? I think all of us have trained at both an HBCU and a PWI in any part of our training. So what was one piece of or one experience that you believe that you've gotten from an HBCU that you think that you wouldn't have gotten from training at a PWI? And I think all of us have that experience, so we can kind of compare and contrast. Myself, I went to Tuskegee for my PhD and did my postdoc at Vanderbilt, 2 totally different worlds. But I appreciate getting my PhD from Tuskegee because it strengthened me in areas when I got to Vanderbilt, it was like cake, right? So what are some experiences that you've had? We can start with Dr. Trish, because I know you did your postdoc at the University of Michigan. So how was that contrast for you?
So at Tuskegee and even at UAB is probably one of the most highly funded in the Southern region for like in terms of R1 funding. So even there was still a lot of resources, but there was still a lack there. At Tuskegee, I had to make everything from scratch, gels, media, whatever it was, calculations, cell counting, everything you can think of. We did it from scratch by hand. And so when I got to Michigan, if something broke down or if we could not get precasted gels or our ready-made solutions, I was the one that everyone went to. Hey, can you show me how to make this solution? Can you show me how to make a gel? Can you show me how to do these calculations? Because they never had to do that. It was already done for them or was already given to them. So for me, it was, while there may not have been as many resources at the HBCUs versus the PWI, it did not take away from the experience and the wealth of knowledge that I experienced because it actually paid off in the end. So for me, that's what it would be.
Thank you. Dr. Powell, do you want to chime in with some experiences that you may have experienced at Emory, and that is in comparison or contrast to the position that you're in now?
I think similarly at Meharry, even though they have resources, even when resources are available, it was drilled in that this is your project, you're going to take ownership of it, and you're responsible for everything from beginning to end. So there isn't a biostats core or a histology core, so you're doing every part of your project, which maybe isn't great for its expediency. But what I learned the moment that I stepped on campus at Emory University School of Medicine is that I really knew how to do everything and understood, like, even though the cores existed, I'm able to provide better direction on what it is that I need. I'm able to, when things are returned to me, to kind of critique it in a way that I would not have been if I wasn't forced to gain that knowledge the way that I did at Meharry. And I will say another advantage, or something that I think we do get, or I got from my HBCU that I didn't necessarily receive at PWI, is not feeling like I'm a position or I'm there to fill a position, but an actual person that the totality of who I was cared about and nurtured and mentored to. And that was a great feeling. I think that really that was more of an influence in molding me in the type of person and the type of scientist that I became than, just the things that I was learning in the labs, just the skills that I received in the lab.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I think all of us want to feel that support, and so attending an HBCU and having that support kind of pushes us through our research, and I think that's really, really crucial. And kind of like, I want to touch on with Dr. Sweeney and Dr. Mullen. I know, Janae, you just graduated, and now you're an assistant professor. Dr. Mullen, you're a postdoctoral fellow, and I'm also fresh out of postdoc, so we're like still fresh in the area. So what are some things that you've learned that you've taken with you to your next step or to your next role after your PhD training? Dr. Mullen.
Well, just like Dr. Trish and Dr. Powell were saying, being resourceful really comes in handy here. At Morehouse College, they push you to be your best version of yourself. And a lot of times my PI just wouldn't give me any direction. And I remember for my second and third aims of my PhD, I literally opened his freezer and just saw what he had, and based what my project was on what he had. I saw he had some proteins related to apoptosis. So I designed my project around it. And a year later, it got published. And I found that coming here at Stanford, it came in handy because last year I was able to publish twice as much as most of my colleagues with half the resources and spending very little money. And being resourceful to that level is something that I may not have gotten from the PWI. Because being here now, I have resources, I'm finding that I don't really need them as much. And something like that is really coming in handy.
Great. And Janae, do you have anything to touch on?
My PI at Clark Atlanta, she really instilled kind of a way of doing things to me. So she always encouraged us to have multiple publications a year. She always encouraged us to break down everything that we were doing in our experiments before we actually did it, really think about what we were doing. So now that it's actually time for me to be a PI and me to, have my own students soon, those are some fundamentals and some values that I plan on instilling in them, because although when I started, I was like, oh, one publication a year, how am I going to do that? After a while, it became easy. If you just did the work and you did experiments, it was easy to help someone else do something. And now you're on another publication. So I just think a lot of the values that I got from Clark Atlanta and from that HBCU, now I can instill that in more HBCU students at the undergrad level.
Great, thank you for that. We have a question in the chat, which is actually one of the questions I wanted to touch on, is how does the process of acquiring funding as a PI differ between PWIs and HBCUs? And so if you fresh to the scene and you don't know, Black professors and Black PIs are traditionally underfunded when it comes to research funding. And that's unfortunate, because at HBCUs, we need the funding to do our work, but we can't have these core centers if we don't have that funding. So I will actually want to start with our more senior panelists, Dr. Trish and Dr. Powell, because they have more experience in this area. So Dr. Trish, can you kind of touch on how that process differs and what you've seen over the years between funding at PWIs and HBCUs?
So at Michigan, it was easy to get funding. I'm not going to say easy. I still had to write the grant. I still had to go through the process, but they have a machine that is, it's just a pipeline. It's easy to do. You look for what's available for funding. 9 times out of 10, your PI is a part of a funding group. So at Michigan, I was a part of the PO1 Group with Ken Pienta, who's now over Johns Hopkins. And so they had this huge prostate PO1 group through the DOD. So when it came time to apply for funding, it was like, I'm in the family, you apply. Ken wrote my letter of recommendation along with a few others. So that really helped a lot. It wasn't, and I want to be very clear when I say this does not take away from anyone at majority institutions that do grants, but what it says is, it was not even so much about the science, it was the exposure and the people that were attached to me that helped me get the grant. And sometimes at HBCUs, if you don't have that attachment, if you don't have that network, it's not that the science isn't sound, it's not that the individual is not capable of doing the work, it's that you lack the name, you lack the connection to get you in the door. And if you ever sit in any type of grant council looking at how grants are funded, a lot of it is based off of who you know. So I think that is one of the things that a lot of faculty and postdocs and grad students struggle with, is just getting your foot in the door or having someone that can speak for you when you're not there.
Thank you. Dr. Powell, do you have kind of any similarities at Clark?
Yes, well, I have unfortunately too much experience with this. Beginning even as a pre-doc, I wrote my first grant when I was a graduate student at Meharry for DOD, and it was funded. So I left there not knowing how very difficult it is, or how the extremes to which these things are put together between a PWI and an MSI in general, I think. So when I arrived at Emory, there was a machine in place, right? So my PI at Emory, we came up with the idea for my grant. We went over to the grant writing office. They assigned me a person who was going to help me write the grant. She pulled everything together for me, basically said, these are the types of preliminary data that I think would be helpful in the grant. We went, I got the data, took it back to them, and they gave me a nice grant, right? Like, they helped pull all the pieces together. And that was funded as well. So not a big deal. And then fast forward to my time at Clark Atlanta, and I get there. And I will say I didn't understand it at Meharry either, because my PI was so, well-versed in it, that she basically was a grants office for me, right? So she pulled all of these things together and helped me formulate the idea and all of this. I'm sure she did a lot of lead work I didn't know as a pre-doc. But my first, welcome to the real scientific world at an MSI happened when I got to Clark Atlanta, and those resources weren't available to me. And every single part of that grant needed to be pulled together by myself. And that's a tremendous amount of work, especially when you're at an MSI or HBCU, where we are really committed to our students and training of our students, not just the graduate students, but our undergraduates as well. And so that's not something I have to deal with at a PWI or my PI at Emory had to deal with. She taught literally 2 lectures within a course the entire year. And even those 2, she said, hey, Joanne, you're really good at this. Do you want to teach these 2 lectures for me, right? So she never went into the classroom. She always had the opportunity to sit and write grants and focus on research, which is not what you have at most HBCUs. So having to pull together all of those pieces, everything from the background data, everything for yourself takes a tremendous amount of time and tremendous amount of work. And I will say my first reality coming back from the review panel was I thought that I wrote an excellent grant. They thought that I wrote an excellent grant. And it got dinged because, quote, we're not sure that the environment is conducive for conducting this type of work. Never once for any grant at Emory had anyone mention whether they thought the environment could support that work, right? And so what we do at Clark that PWIs don't have to do is we have this huge list of equipment and resources that are on campus that we include with our grants. So in review panel, they can't sit there and say, oh, well, they probably don't have X, Y, and Z, right? Even though now I realize from sitting on review panels, they will still ignore that if there's not someone there to say, no, I've read their grant. They do have this, which is why I want to tell everybody who's on the call, every time you're invited to sit on a review panel, I know it takes time. Who wants to sit down and read 25 proposals and all of that stuff? It's important though, because if we're not there to represent and stand up for these applications that are coming from MSIs and HBCUs, they just get pushed to the side with that verbiage of we don't know if they can do. The most recent grant panel I was on, someone actually left out a piece of the grant, right? But someone else on the panel said, well, we know they can do it. They're coming from, and I won't mention the institution, a great PWI, right? So we shouldn't even question that. And it was up to me to say, hold up. We cannot give this grant the benefit of the doubt without giving this grant the same benefit of the doubt. That is bias, right? And those biases exist on all the review panels, especially when we're not there to represent and stand up and have our voices heard. And I'll stop there. But I have plenty to say about this.
Can I add one thing too, Henry?
Yeah.
One thing just to, extend what Dr. Powell said. When I got my grant as a graduate student and even as my postdoc, one of the things that I had to do differently between my grad proposal grant versus my postdoc was I had to use an exhaustive list of collaborators at majority institutions. And that's not something that I had to do for my postdoc, right? So I had to go in and show them, okay, hey, I have this mentor at this institution. And then they had to give me a letter to kind of co-sign that, hey, whatever is lacking, I'm going to make up for it. And I think that's something else that I would give to anyone that is working on a grant for your grad level or even your postdoc is identify where there are holes, identify where they may say you're missing something, there's a lack of resources here, and find someone at a majority institution that can serve as a mentor for you and a collaborator, because it's definitely going to set you apart from others that are participating in that same process.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. I feel empowered. Basically, y'all, we need a seat at the table. That's what Dr. Powell is saying. We need to be in the room and sitting at the table. Dr. Mullen and Dr. Sweeney.
Can I just, since I'm passing, there is NIH has a junior review panel that you can sign up, and every review panel is supposed to choose members from the junior review panel list to come in, and even if you're not part of the voting of the panel, to sit into the room and see how the decisions are made on which grants are funded and which grants are not funded. So I think it's CSR, maybe the center that holds that, but if you Google it, I'm sure it'll come up. And that's how I started getting invited to sit on panels through that.
Great, thank you. I'm pretty sure one of our team members, if y'all can search the line and plop the link up in the chat, please and thank you. Dr. Mullen and Dr. Sweeney, have you had any experiences, Janae being a recent graduating now as assistant professor. You're getting ready to start your grant. I remember you just told me you were literally just gutting an entomology lab and making it a cancer biology lab now. So how's that been?
Yes, so Dr. Powell and Dr. Trish hit the nail on the head because I am literally going through that right now. So I just got access to my lab yesterday. So I'm switching it over from the previous person was an entomologist. So I'm switching it from an entomology lab to a cancer biology lab, which I have to sterilize everything. So then in addition to that, I'm writing a K01 grant for the NIH. And because I'm at South Carolina State University, I'm noticing that me and another junior faculty that's here that's doing the same thing, we have to link the PWI that's kind of closest to us, MUSC, or the Medical University of South Carolina, to everything we do. So I'm, in the process of trying to find mentors there or collaborators there, and even possibly going to University of South Carolina, which is on the opposite direction of MUSC, to kind of try to find different people that we can attach to our grants so that they'll say, okay, well, they'll have help at these institutions, someone to help them, even though we don't need it, but, they'll have help from those people to, make their grants better. So I'm literally going through that right now. It does happen. I did not know that happened because, as Dr. Powell said, as a pre-doc, I was, okay, my PI has it. All right. I did not know anything that she was doing behind the scenes or what she was going through to have to get the grants that she was getting. So now that I'm in, the shoes of a PI, now I understand exactly what it is. And often we do have to attach other schools to our work, even though we are producing great work. We can do every single thing that they can do, but they are the big dogs, according to the NIH, even though they might not necessarily be.
Maybe Henry is frozen.
I think he's frozen.
We can look in the chat to see if there are any questions while we're waiting for him to come.
I do see that Elle found the CSR site for becoming a reviewer. So I would just encourage everybody to go and sign up for that. Like let's get in the room and let's fight for the grants that are coming. I mean, some of the grants get dinged for reasons that are just like, really? Are you really, do you really think that they don't have that microscope that they would propose, because if they didn't have the microscope, they would have put it in the budget, right? So like things like that, where you can sometimes just being in the room also, you can tell will pull people back from making comments that they may otherwise make if you weren't in the room. So please, everybody, just, sign up to become a reviewer.
Well, there is another question in the chat from Chris. He wants to know if there are any pots of money that are only of grant funding that are only for HBCUs available.
Yes, there is. And actually what we're seeing too with a lot of majority institutions now are actually attaching themselves to faculty at minority institutions so that they can get a part of that pot of money. But yes, there is, but it's not as large as you would expect. And there are loopholes that you can get. So right now I'm working on an R15 grant. And where I'm at, the majority of the faculty there are environmental. So it was easier for me to get like an NSF grant as a co-collaborator. But there you just have to be really savvy with how you go about getting funding, because if you're, for an example, NCI is highly saturated, right? And the success rate of getting a grant funded in NCI is very, very low. So you have to think about, okay, what opportunities are available, what grants are specifically for minority institutions or minority serving institutions, and go after that. But the only issue is you are limited sometimes to the specific agency that you can go to. But you just have to kind of, be savvy with that.
To piggyback off of what Dr. Trish is saying, the fellowship that I'm on now is called Propel, and it's actually for underrepresented minorities. And when I was at Morehouse College, I was on a strict stipend, PhD stipend. But since I've been at Stanford, I've actually had 2 fellowships in under a year, and largely because I'm a minority. So I would definitely encourage you to reach out to any minority grants that are out there. And if you look, there are quite a few. And I'm actually doing a panel next week with Morehouse and with Morehouse College to talk to the students to provide information, because one of the reasons I didn't apply to any grants when I was a graduate student is because I didn't know about them. So if someone just comes back and talks to them and lets them know that these are available, it can change everything. So.
And I would just like to point out both edges of this sword, right? So if you are currently still in training as a graduate student or postdoc, your PI can apply for supplements for grants that they have to support you. Now, this is wonderful if you have a PI who's just being supportive and they want to make sure that you have the support that you need. The other edge of that sword is you have to be very careful of motivations. I've seen, and I've had friends of mine and mentees of mine as well, who were put on these supplements and not necessarily nurtured in the best way, but kept because they were on a supplement seen as, you know, laboratory staff that was free to the PI. And you never want to fall into that boat. If you are in a lab, you deserve the nurturing, the support, and the mentoring that everyone else is getting, not just the space. You're not there just to take up a space.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think I clicked off, my internet is acting crazy, but thanks Tiara for holding it down with the questions in the chat. I know we're getting close to time because I want to hit on this point right here, because this is what we hear a lot for people who attend HBCUs, not only for undergraduate, but if they decide to go off to medical school or to get their PhD or law school. We hear that sometimes HBCU degrees are less valuable than PWIs. I disagree with that for many reasons. But if you have any thoughts on that comment, specifically for people who aren't familiar with HBCUs and they hear a name, and most people, honestly, when they hear a HBCU name, they don't know it is HBCU until you tell them. They probably know the Howards, the Tuskegees, the Morehouse, right? But the less common ones, they probably wouldn't know it's an HBCU. And so you find that when they don't know it's an HBCU, they kind of treat you a little differently. But if they know, that the attitude switches up. So if you have any comment on the HBCU degree is less valuable, or the HBCU training is less valuable than that of a PWI, I would love to hear some thoughts on that. Anybody can take the floor.
I can speak to that a little because I kind of played into that, which is why I went to Georgia State for my master's. I assumed that, oh, let me go to this PWI because I'm just going to get something better than I did here, you know, to catapult me to the next level. And that wasn't really the case. I mean, I got a good education, but when I did my PhD at Clark Atlanta afterwards, I just noticed the level of training that I got wasn't any less valuable than the PWI that I went to for my master's. And then also the professors that were teaching me cared a little bit more about me at CAU, the HBCU that I went to for my PhD, than did my PWI, Georgia State University, for my master's. So the relationship was better. And I always use this example of what actually happened one day after class. A few students and I had to surround a faculty member at Georgia State and say, no, we just have a few questions about this one thing. Please stay and talk. We had to literally, all of us surrounded him in the hallway till he said, okay, 5 minutes. But I never got that at another institution. So if they're really that much more valuable, why is it that it's so hard to, you know, nail people down when you're trying to get help or assistance? So I don't think that they're any more valuable than HBCUs. I actually think HBCUs can be a lot more valuable to those of us who, you know, African-American Black students who want to be around people that care about them, that they can see themselves in those professors.
So I'll give a quick, I'm trying to make this as quick as possible, but I sat on a board for a very well-known organization. And on this board, I probably was the only one that went to an HBCU for my my PhD. And I remember internalizing all of those things, that negative energy, the negative stereotypes, and it really feeds into an imposter syndrome, because then you begin to feel as though you are only there for a reason, or you're not qualified to be there. So I was quiet. And I'm sitting at this boardroom table and all of these different individuals from these Ivy League schools are talking. And I'm thinking to myself, they're skating around what needs to be said, but they're not saying it. So I finally mustered up enough energy to say it. And they're like, oh my goodness, that's it, that we couldn't get it. It was in that moment that I realized a lot of the times we internalize the negativity and the negative stereotypes that are not true. And the only way that we can dismiss that, dispel those things, is if we walk in our value and know who we are, and not allow that negativity to really dictate who we are. Because the difference between someone at an HBCU versus a PWI is they have an air about themselves. They actually believe the hype. So even if they don't know a lot, they believe the hype. But I can guarantee you, just as there are people that fail at Yale, there are still people that fail at a minority institution. I'm at a faculty position now, and one of the faculty members graduated from Yale, and I've been promoted much higher than he has, and he has not moved at all. So the point I'm making, it's you, it's not the institution. You can go to an Ivy League and still fail, just like you can go to a HBCU and fail. So don't allow that negative stereotype to really cause you to think different about yourself or the air that you carry.
So my prepared response when someone tells me that they don't think a degree from the HBCU is as valuable, my response is always, it depends on what you value. And then I follow that with a list of about 10 things that I know you can get at an HBCU that you have to search for at PWIs. I mean, as a professor at Clark Atlanta, I get students from tech and state all the time who are coming over to our events, searching for mentoring, searching for help, right? So there are things that we provide. There's a culture that we provide that just can't be replicated anyplace else. So I always start with, it depends on what you value.
Yeah, I like that point. And kind of what Dr. Trish was talking about imposter syndrome. That's something that we all like deal with. I don't think it ever goes away, but sometimes we kind of understand how to navigate it as we go forward within our career. And one of the things for me, when I left Tuskegee and got to Vanderbilt, I realized, I'm at this now. I'm not in academia anymore. I'm in industry, but I'm in a position where all these people from the Ivy League schools or the R1 schools, we're all in the same job. We're all doing the same thing. So we started at different places, but we ended up at the same role at the same company doing the same thing. And so that to me kind of instilled in me that it doesn't matter where you start, it's how you finish. So Dr. Mullen, do you have any points on that?
I just entirely agree with what Dr. Powell was saying. I definitely had imposter syndrome when I first started at Stanford the first few months, but I literally started wearing my class ring that my dad got me when I was at Morehouse College to remind myself that I deserve to be here and to not do negative self-talk, because that's a real thing that a lot of minorities I've talked to here are facing, where they beat themselves up and feel like just because they're the only ones there, they're not supposed to be there. But you have to continuously tell yourself that you're here because you belong here and you deserve to be here. And when I started doing positive self-talk and really motivating myself to do my best, things started working out. And that's why I'm reaching out to Morehouse School of Medicine and Morehouse College students so I can tell them the same thing, because I even had imposter syndrome when I was in graduate school, but I overcame that, obviously. And yeah, sometimes you just need to see someone doing things that you didn't think you could do to know that you can do it.
Yeah, thank you for that. We have two more questions. I kind of wanted to hit on this point too. Early in the talk, Dr. Powell was mentioning how the sense of community and research being done in the community helped kind of guide her decision to attend Meharry. So as PhDs or PIs at HBCUs, how does doing our work within our community, because most HBCUs are surrounded by a Black community, how does doing that work in our Black community help us better at projects with a racial disparity aspect? So how does having a PhD from an HBCU or attending an HBCU for training help us kind of connect with community a little better when it comes to these things such as racial disparity, specifically in cancer? Anybody can take the floor, it doesn't matter.
So I think beyond the obvious of it being a huge motivating factor, right? Because sometimes we're in our labs, we're in our ivory towers, and you can become a bit disconnected from, well, why am I doing this already, right? We're looking at proteins and DNA and all of those things, but we're doing it because we want to improve people's lives. And the more that I get to interact with those people, with our communities, it gives you just a sense of motivation, like, okay, I'm going to go back and I'm going to run this thing one more time. And maybe I need to look at it from X, Y, and Z. And it also, for me, helps to guide the next question that I'm going to ask. So right now, the project that I saw Kofi earlier, I've been interested in obesity and how it may relate to or influence prostate cancer incidence, specifically within the African-American community. And so finally, after thinking about this for a few years, I was able to partner with a faculty member at Morehouse College, and we have a graduate student now who's working on just that project. I wouldn't have thought about that if I hadn't have made the connection between high obesity rates within our communities and the high rate of cancer incidence within our communities, and how what I study, environmental factors, may play a role in that. So I'm happy to have a graduate student that's finally working on that. And, it's just, it's motivating. It kind of drives your questions in a sense.
Yeah, I like that fact. And I kind of want to give like a quick tidbit off of that. I did my postdoc at Vanderbilt, and it was really easy for people within the community. And Vanderbilt is separated from where the majority of Black people are in Nashville. So, when we go to the community, they always come to me to ask the questions because they see a familiar face. And so having a familiar face within the community and pairing it with your research, I think it really does a lot for doing research within the community. Dr. Sweeney or Dr. Treasure or Dr. Mullen, do you have any experiences in this case?
It's literally the same thing you just said. They see someone that looks like them. So it makes it a bit easier for them to sometimes understand, okay, maybe this is really important if I actually see someone that, looks like me doing the actual work. And I think sometimes it's all about, in our community, we know that sometimes if we break it down in layman's terms, maybe they may understand it a bit better, and they may be more interested than if they're not getting that somewhere else, so that they don't want to really pay attention to that because might go above their head. So I think it's more about them seeing people that look exactly like them doing the work, and it makes it seem more important.
I agree. It makes a huge difference if you see someone who looks like you doing the work. And also if it's, your mom or your grandmother, your grandfather who's going through this. For instance, when I was doing my PhD, I studied triple-negative breast cancer, and every single paper that was published was on this one cell line. There's 231 cell line that was on a Caucasian woman, but no one looked into any of these Black women's cell lines. So that's what I did for my PhD. I tested this drug out that they used on my mom on this Black woman's cells, and they didn't work. You can't generalize and say that just because it didn't work for this one cell line doesn't work for Black women, but it does start an important conversation that needs to be had. Like, why aren't we being researched? Why isn't anyone looking into our cell lines?
Absolutely. I think the other benefit for the community outreach portion was, aside from being in the lab, working in prostate cancer research during my grad work, we were able to go into the community and have these barbershop experiences and talk to Black men about the importance of getting their prostate checked. And, there were moments where I probably had to kind of, dip out a little bit because it got a little bit intense, and they had questions that I couldn't comfortably answer, but there were other Black men in the room that could talk to them about, okay, what are the side effects when you don't check your prostate? What are some things that you should look for if you think you may have some issue going on? And so being able to see firsthand, Black men in the community that, like my dad, my grandfather, it really motivated me on those days when I didn't get good results to keep pushing, and as a reminder of what I'm here for. So definitely a benefit.
Great. And the last question, and I can give tons and tons of advice and notes, but I kind of just want to pick just one. So if you can give one piece of advice to an aspirant who wants to apply to an HBCU for graduate training or undergraduate training, what would you give them? And I kind of want to put this too, you don't have to be Black to go to an HBCU. HBCU does not mean just for Black people. It means historically, we were able to go to other schools, and so we created our own, but our schools are inclusive of everyone. So I just wanted to point that out before we get into the topic. But for the last question, what's one piece of advice you will give to someone who wants to attend an HBCU, specifically in STEM? We can actually start with Dr. Powell, and I want to get one piece of advice from everyone.
So the advice that I do give to all of my students now in my family is that understanding accountability matters for you too. right? And so you, in every situation, not just in STEM, you're going to get out of the situation what you put into it. And if you enter that going, hey, I'm here, pour into me, show me what you have, then you'll get something. But what do you give if you go in focused with your own goals in mind and with a plan of how you're going to get there? Partner that with the assistance that's available at an HBCU, and the possibilities are almost limitless, right? So Kofi's on the call. Kofi always comes, with things that I've not thought about, like, hey, Dr. Powell, I want to do this for biotech, and I want to do, and I'm always like, yeah, go for it. Not something I do, wasn't my interest, but let's consider it. Let's see how we can make that happen. And since this may be my last opportunity, since it's the last question, and we were talking about representation matters, the new hat that I'm wearing at Clark Atlanta is chair of the biology department. And we are now in the process of trying to bring in 2 new faculty members for fall of 2022. So in the chat, I just put the announcement for that. I would love to see more applications coming from people within this group or within your network. I don't know if it's everyone else's experiences, but my experience attending HBCUs is that although I was at an HBCU, my STEM faculty often were underrepresented when it came to people who look like me. Right? I maybe had 1 or 2 faculty members within my department who looked like me. And so if representation matters, then we should come back and be that next person that's going to motivate the next generation of students coming after us. So consider applying for these positions at Clark Atlanta. I will shut up as soon as I say we do have one of the largest prostate cancer research centers in the country. And although that is the case, we are open to anyone or any applicants who may have diversity in thought in their interest as well. So not just prostate cancer researchers. Apply. Let's have a conversation.
We're gonna get that on our Twitter today, so people can see that. Yeah, we have to. We're gonna, that shameless plug. We love it. Dr. Trish.
I would say do your research. In addition to everything that Dr. Powell said, which was amazing advice, do your research, because you'll find that certain institutions are known for certain things, and you want to look at their faculty. I was literally blessed to have the mentor that I did. He was young, he was energized. So my success was contingent upon his success and vice versa. So he really made sure I was active, even though I had that drive within myself. So make sure if you're going to an HBC, let's say for postdoc, even grad school, do your research first to see what faculty members are there, what research are they doing, and what is their lineage? Because their network becomes your network. And that's going to be very helpful as you progress. And it still serves me today.
Shout out to Dr. Clayton Yates. He couldn't make it, but I asked him to. Dr. Mullen.
Just like Dr. Trish was saying, reach out, do your research, send an email. If you're interested in going to an institution, email the director or the head of whatever graduate department. A lot of times you'll find that they'll take you out in under their wing. They'll take you on a tour. They'll even introduce you to people that might be their future mentors. Morehouse School of Medicine is very good for that. When I was a graduate student, I took so many students who wanted to be prospective students on tours just because they want you to apply. So just send a simple email, go to the website, it takes 2 seconds, very easy.
Thank you. And Dr. Sweeney.
I'll give something that I use for myself, and I always tell students, believe in yourself and get out of your own way. Everything is achievable, but like Dr. Powell said, like Dr. Trish said, like Dr. Mullen said, it takes work. You have to work, you have to do the research, you have to hold yourself accountable. But the main thing is believe you can do it. If you believe you can do it, everything will fall into place if you put in that work and you put in that research and you do all the things that's required of you to get to the next step. There's no room, there's no area that you are not supposed to be in as long as you work for it. You can work for it and you can get to it.
Great. And that brings us to a close of our talk. We ended right on time. So I love that. But I want to thank the panelists again, Dr. Powell. Oh, go ahead.
Can I make a shameless plug really quick? I'm so
Yeah, go
sorry.
ahead. Yeah.
One of my mentees, Gabrielle Nobles, is in here. She's doing an intern at Moffitt. And so she may be, Dr. Powell, that may be a great opportunity for her. She wants to do cancer research. So I'll make sure I try to connect you all together. But definitely, I think she's a shining star, next coming scientist in the making. So I wanted to make sure, let you all know that she is here and she is an aspiring scientist in the cancer field.
We love it. We love it. And have her connect with me on Twitter or LinkedIn, and we'll set it up. We'll set up a meeting and everything.
I will.
Yeah, perfect. Any more plugs? Or is this an open floor? Well, perfect.
I have a plug.
Oh, go ahead.
So I started an organization called Be STEMsational. I have an Instagram, so you can go and add it on Instagram, Be STEMsational, one word. And I'm really going to get it up and going. I really want to give resources. Talks like this are exactly what I want to do in the organization. Resources to know where to go, what HBCUs have what programs. So I'm very interested in doing that. It's not up and running yet, but it's going to get there. So Be STEMsational on Instagram, and then eventually I'll have a website as well for it.
Perfect. Thank y'all. I really appreciate it. I think even the chat says this is an amazing talk. I think it was really well needed, and we wanted to do it during Black History Month. But just the emphasis of the HBCUs goes past Black History Month. So this is a conversation we need to continue to have. Dr. Powell, Dr. Trish, Dr. Mullen, Dr. Sweeney, thank you again for coming on and having this wonderful and powerful conversation. And we wish everyone the best. And if anyone wants their contact information, please send me an email on Dr. H.J. Henderson or on Twitter, or hit up Black and Cancer. It's Black and Cancer at all platforms, Instagram, Twitter. We don't have a Snapchat, but I think we have a TikTok and Gmail. So please just, if you have a question, reach out. But that brings us to the end of our session today. We want to wish everyone a wonderful weekend and a wonderful rest of the afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye. Take care, everyone.
Bye.